I've got my laptop today, so we are gonna go ahead and review and compare 5 different dry foods and 5 different fresh foods to see if they fit the nutritional profile for an inactive dog. Now, if you're not really sure what the inactive dog's nutritional profile is, I'll go ahead and link a video for you to watch before this one so you have a little bit of an idea of what my goals are or what we're trying to find in these diets. But if you don't know me, my name is Nikki. I'm a registered veterinary technician, and today we're gonna go ahead and break down some dog food. Now, I do want to put up a little bit of a disclaimer here because every dog is an individual, and though I will be talking about generalities here, your dog may not fit into the typical profile, and that's totally fine. Another thing that I want to clarify is how I'm going to be comparing these diets. So I'm going to be taking the guaranteed analysis on these diets, and then I'm going to convert that to nutrient density, which is grams per 1,000 kcal. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is because the guaranteed analysis isn't really a great way to compare pet foods. The guaranteed analysis is affected by both the moisture content of the diet and the caloric density of the diet. So by converting it to a nutrient density, then I'm going to account for those two factors. Now, most pet food review sites are going to convert to a dry matter basis, which does take moisture out of the equation, but it doesn't actually account for the caloric density or the nutrients per serving that your dog is actually ingesting. If you're not familiar with nutrient density and kind of what I'm looking for, then you can go ahead and check out a blog post below where I show you how to do that math. And if you're not a math person, I do have an Excel spreadsheet at the very end that you can purchase. Other thing that I'm going to do when I'm comparing these diets is I'm going to go through what's called the WSAVA guidelines on each of these diets, so you have kind of a bigger picture on these recipes rather than just the nutritional profile. So really what I'm going to be focusing on is going to be big picture items, if it fits your dog's nutritional needs, and then the background of the company itself. All right, so let's get started. The first diet that we're going to be looking at is the Stella and Chewy raw coated kibble wholesome grains beef recipe with pumpkin and quinoa. That is a huge mouthful. So basically what I did is I took the guaranteed analysis and I'm converting it over to a nutrient density so I can look at this diet a little bit more accurately. So when I look at the protein, it's kind of a moderate amount of protein, 75 grams per 1,000 kilocalories. That does meet our protein that we're looking for a more inactive dog. Fat content is moderately high at about 47 grams per 1,000 kilocalories. And then our carbohydrates are about 87, which is kind of a moderate amount of carbohydrates. Crude fiber is 6%. That is a moderate amount of crude fiber, which is good. That's what we want to look at. And you can see that we have that higher amount of protein with a little bit higher amount of fiber. So together that probably will create more satiety for the dog. The other thing that we look at is caloric density. This diet does have a pretty high caloric density. So we're looking at about 450 kcals per cup. Now that's a lot of calories per serving, potentially for a dog. And if you do have like a smaller breed dog, you may not be able to measure this very accurately because you're going to be going between cups. So you might have to measure in grams. For a bigger dog or any dog fed this diet, it just might not seem like your dog's getting a lot of food. A medium-sized dog might only get 1 cup per day, which depending on the person and how they personally feel, it might feel restrictive to them and then more likely to supplement other things, which could potentially lead to weight gain, which we definitely don't want with our dogs because we know that that puts more pressure on their joints. And we do have those longevity studies as well that we can cite where these dogs kept at healthier weights live potentially 1 to 3 years longer depending on breed. So weight management is really, really important. The other thing that I don't love about this diet, especially for our older adults to seniors, is that this is an all life stage formula. Now what that means is that it's formulated for the most taxing life stage, which is puppyhood, but that they say that it's okay for you to feed it to adults too. Now I would agree you can feed a puppy formula to an adult and they won't have deficiencies, but once we get to our older years as far as adulthood and seniorhood, those extra minerals that we put into the puppy food probably aren't very necessary for our adults, and they do need to be excreted by the bodies. And you're just putting unnecessary pressure on these organs that are aging that maybe we need to be a little bit more gentler to. So if you have an older adult or a senior, I probably wouldn't recommend, generally speaking, an all life stage formula. When we do look at Stella and Chewy as a company as a whole, I like to look at first pathogen testing. They are using something called HPPs, using high pressure pasteurization, which kind of sterilizes a raw product using pressure, and that's going to remove potentially those harmful bacteria. So I like seeing that with a raw product. And then they also do test and hold, meaning that they send the product out to a lab first, a sample, to test for pathogen, and then do not release that product to the public until the testing comes back negative. So I love seeing that with a company. As far as who formulated the diet, they said that they consult with an animal nutritionist that has a PhD on their formulations. However, they don't have a nutritionist on staff. I always prefer if a company also invests in having a nutritionist on staff so that they can really go over those formulas and make sure on a regular basis that nothing needs to be adjusted. They don't have any digestibility or feeding trails on their diets. I do prefer at least feeding trails on diets to really know what the digestibility of the protein is and the fat content, so that we know if the dogs are getting those essential nutrients that they need. As far as where they're manufacturing their diets, they do manufacture most of their diets. So about 90% of their diets are manufactured by the company itself, but they are outsourcing about 10% of their manufacturing to what's called a co-packing facility. Co-packing facilities are facilities that manufacture a whole bunch of different foods all in the same area. So I prefer not seeing companies using co-packing facilities and instead like investing in manufacturing their own foods, just because one, it shows that the company is committed to not just formulating a diet and marketing a diet, but manufacturing and producing the diet. And a lot of the times when you're using a co-packing facility, you aren't on site for the actual manufacturing process, and you do have the potential for cross-contamination between many different brands of food. All right, so the next diet that we are going to be looking at is going to be the Purina Pro Plan Weight Management Diet. So again, I converted the guaranteed analysis over to a nutrient density. We do have a moderately high amount of protein, so 80 grams per 1,000 kcal. We have a lower amount of fat here, so right around 28 grams per 1,000 kcal, and then a higher amount of carbohydrates, so about 115 grams per 1,000 kcal. As far as fiber, we're still at that moderate amount, about 6 of crude fiber. Our caloric density though in this diet is a lot lower, so we're looking at about 100 kcal per cup less, so 360 kcal per cup, which is good. I still like seeing it a little bit lower as far as caloric density for these dogs that need to maintain a healthy weight. I like seeing it right around 300, just because I find that weight maintenance is just a little bit easier when it's a little bit lower. But overall composition, that higher amount of protein with that higher amount of fiber is going to help with our satiety. The lower caloric density is going to make it easier to feed to maintain a healthy weight. So those are all really good things that I could see. If you did want to play with caloric density a little bit with this diet, can rehydrate it with some just cool waters, and it'll just have more volume than it did before because of the added moisture. Now, where the Stella and Chewy's was an all life stage diet, this diet is actually made for adult dogs only, which again, I like seeing because I don't like seeing that puppy food or that higher mineral content for our senior dogs. The one thing that I will say, especially about seniors, is that senior dogs do have actually higher protein needs than like an adult dog does because of higher muscular turnover. So typically I like looking for senior dog diets that have about 85 to 90 grams of protein per 1,000 kcal, as long as there is not a medical condition that would make that so that it's not a good idea. Now, as far as the company as a whole, they do have test and hold on their recipes, checking for pathogens and toxins. They do spot checks for ingredients and final product for key nutrient factors. And they do have a typical analysis available on all their diets. You just have to request it. It's not available online. They have a whole department on nutrition. So they have people that have a master's, PhD, they have board certified veterinary nutritionists, they have food scientists, chemists, the whole shebang. So they have lots of highly qualified personnel on staff that help formulate, develop, and keep quality control under check. They do regularly perform feeding and digestibility trials. I feel like Purina Pro Plan is one of those diets where you can actually pick up most of their foods, and they have done an AFCO feeding trial on it and done a digestibility trial on it, where you don't actually see that with a lot of other brands. They do manufacture all their own recipes. I would say that the one downside is they have had some recalls in the past that have been pretty nasty. Most of them have been associated with basically their suppliers not being honest with them. So the next diet we're going to be looking at is the Open Farm Ancient Grains Fish. So I went ahead and converted that from a guaranteed analysis to the nutrient density again, and I found that it's kind of moderate as far as protein, moderate high as far as fat, and then pretty high as far as carbohydrates are concerned. Fiber is like moderate low at 5%. Caloric density is pretty high. So I feel like this kind of fits in the same space almost as the Stella and Chewy's, where we see that little bit higher amount of protein with that kind of moderate amount of fiber, which could probably help with satiety, but we have that higher amount of fat that also comes into that higher amount of caloric density, where it might be difficult to maintain a healthy weight on this diet just because of the amount of food you would need to feed in order to maintain a healthy weight for an inactive dog. You could try that water trick that I talked about and see if that kind of helps you, but it might be something where you need something less calorically dense in order to have better weight maintenance for your dog if you were choosing a diet like this. The other thing that again is a downside is this is an all life stage formula again. So when we get into our later years, this may not be like my first choice because it's not an adult maintenance diet. It has a lot of extra minerals that your dog's organs are going to have to process and move through that they just don't need. As far as the company as a whole, they do have test and hold procedures for their recipes, checking for pathogens and toxins. They do spot checks on ingredients and final products, and they do actually have typical analysis on all their diets available. They used a PhD food scientist and animal nutritionist to formulate their recipes. And you might be wondering why they were using a food scientist in the recipe formulation. And the reason for this might be because the open farm recipes, you can see that they have like a raw coated, a kibble, a gently cooked, like a lot of different preparations. And a lot of food scientists can account for in their formulations different types of preparation methods. So it can be a good choice in some brands to use a food scientist as a formulator that's highly qualified, like a PhD, as long as they've taken classes, courses, and additional education in pet food formulation and have that experience in that area. And then they actually take that formulation with open farm that's formulated and they have that reviewed by a panel of experts. So they are taking that extra step to try to make sure their formulations are appropriate. They haven't performed any AFCO feeding trials on their diet. They've performed digestibility trials on some, but not all of their diets. And they do use a co-packing facility to manufacture all of their products. So they aren't actually responsible for the manufacturing of their food. They're more on the formulation and then the business side as far as marketing and distributing their foods, if that makes sense. My last dry diet, and then we're gonna move into the fresh food diet, it's gonna be the Honest Kitchen Dehydrated Beef and Salmon recipe. Now this is one of their newer dehydrated diets. As far as overall composition for our inactive dogs, when I went ahead and converted everything over, we have higher amounts of protein, so 85 grams per 1,000 kcal, higher amounts of fat here, so about 43 grams per 1,000 kcal, and then moderately high amounts of carbohydrates at 96 grams per 1,000 kcal. Fiber is that moderate amount right at 5%. So most likely combination of protein and fiber here is going to give us that satiety we're looking for our inactive dogs. As far as caloric density is pretty high, it is 423 kcal per cup. However, I do give a caveat here because this diet is meant to be rehydrated. That's actually how this diet works. So what I would do is instead of measuring your diet in cups, measure it in grams and rehydrate it that way so that you're more accurate on measuring your dry product, and then you'll have the volume because you're adding in that moisture content. So the actual caloric density as fed would be a lot less than what's on here, probably about half. Now again, I have to say that this is an all life stage formula. So for our older dogs, it's just not my favorite thing because of those extra minerals. But as far as the company as a whole, they do have really good quality control standards. They have test and hold. They do spot checks on ingredients and final products. They have typical analysis available on all their diets. Recipes are formulated by an integrated veterinarian and then reviewed by a panel of veterinarians, food scientists, and animal nutritionists. They have performed AFCO feeding trials like on some select diets, but not all of them. They also have performed digestibility trials on most of their diets. Now, as far as digestibility trials go, you can ask companies for actual values. I do want to give you some numbers. So when you're looking at total tract digestibility for the inactive dog category, it's not going to be probably the best way to evaluate if it's appropriate for your dog or if it's considered highly digestible. Most of these diets that are higher in fiber will be lower in digestibility just because of that higher fiber content and also potentially the lower amount of fat that's within those recipes. So if you do see lower amounts of total tract digestibility on a dry matter basis towards the 80s or even 75%, that's pretty normal. However, you do want to look at your protein digestibility, and you want to try to keep that above an 85. So ask for the total track, but I really want you to pay more attention to the actual protein digestibility and the fat digestibility in particular of these diets. Now, wrapping up Honest Kitchen here, they do own their own manufacturing facility, which I think is great, and that has allowed them to actually produce a human grade food, including human grade kibble. Now, I did want to include kind of one budget friendly option within this review. So we're going to be talking about the Blue Buffalo Healthy Weight. So when I went ahead and took the guaranteed analysis and transitioned this over to nutrient density, we can see that the protein content is on kind of the lower end of the moderate range at 66 grams per 1,000 kcal. Fat is on the lower end of moderate as well at 30 grams per 1,000 kcal. And then carbohydrates is pretty high at about 138 grams per 1,000 kcal. Fiber content is also very high, 11%. That's going to produce a very big stool. Caloric density is low at 326 kcal per cup. Now, overall, this recipe, when I look at it, the thing that concerns me is the amount of protein. So we know that higher amounts of protein coupled with higher amounts of fiber does help with satiety, but since this protein number is a little bit on the lower side, we may not see actually as much diet satisfaction with this particular food. The other thing is, depending on your dog, especially our older seniors where they have higher protein needs, this amount of protein may not be enough to actually meet minimum amounts for our seniors, and we may see muscle wasting over time, which is also something that we don't want to see. So overall, I do like the amount of caloric density. I do like the amount of fat content within this diet to allow for that lower caloric density, but the amount of protein I do not love. I wish it was a little bit higher. Company as a whole, they don't really have any mention of quality control procedures as far as pathogens, but they did mention that they spot check ingredients and then final product for pathogens, toxins, and key nutritional factors. Recipes are formulated by a PhD animal nutritionist, which is on staff, which is cool. They don't have any APCO feeding trails that I know of or digestibility trials, which isn't great. And they do manufacture about 80% of their recipes, but not all of them. So 20% of their recipes are actually manufactured at a co-packing facility. All right, so let's take a big deep breath, and then we are gonna move on to our fresh food diet. So we're gonna rapid fire here a little bit more because I feel like I've done a lot of the explanation part, so it's gonna go a lot quicker. All right, first recipe is going to be from a very popular pet food brand in the fresh food space, which is Farmer's Dog. I went ahead and converted that guaranteed analysis to nutrient density. They actually have a veterinary PDF that you can get access to if you are part of the veterinary space like I am. So the values that you see is part of that PDF. They are a high protein, very high fat, carbohydrate restrictive diet. So 120 grams per 1,000 kcal as far as protein, 66 grams per 1,000 kcal as far as fat. And then our kcals per kg, we're looking at about 1,300. As far as caloric density, it is lower than all of our dry food diets, so likely not as difficult to make sure that we maintain a healthy weight. Issue that we have with this diet is that we have this higher amount of protein, but we don't have a super high amount of fiber. So you may not see as much diet satisfaction with this composition. So my recommendation with something like this, where we have a fiber content that's slightly lower, is to add fiber in the sense of adding in some more fruits and vegetables. A lot of times they can bump up your fiber content just a little bit in order to help with that satiety. Other things that you can use is using something like a slow feeder so that your dogs recognize that they're actually consuming the right amount of calories to feel full rather than just gulping it down really, really fast. This recipe is an all life stage diet. So again, not super excited about it for our older adults or seniors because it's formulated for puppies with those extra minerals, but it's overall for our younger dogs maybe a really good option for weight maintenance. As far as the company as a whole, recipes are formulated and reviewed by a board certified veterinary nutritionist and a PhD animal nutritionist. I love that. All their diets have undergone digestibility trials, which is great. And they've done in-house feeding trials, but they haven't done like official AFCO feeding trials. They do have a test and hold on all the recipes for pathogens and toxins. They do spot checks for their ingredients incoming and their final products, which I love. And then they also have that typical analysis available in all their diets. So all of that's good. They use a USDA inspected human grade facility. So it's a facility that also produces human food. So it's a co-packing facility, but for humans. Now, Now, is this good or bad? Well, basically there is that chance still of cross-contamination that's available, and they aren't handling the manufacturing themselves. So there is the question of how much they are on site to make sure that their standards are being upheld. Looks like they're trying to do that as much as possible with their quality assurance program though. Now, the next fresh food diet that I wanted to talk about is another one that's from a popular brand, which is the Just Food for Dogs Venison and Squash diet. Again, transitioning that over to nutrient density, we are looking at a 119 grams per 1,000 kcal protein content, 45 grams per 1,000 kcal fat content, and then 74 grams per 1,000 kcal for carbohydrates. Higher amount of crude fiber here at 8%. So we have a higher amount of protein with that one that's above 100, with that higher amount of fiber, most likely going to help us with some satiety here. Fat content is a little bit lower, and you actually see that reflected in the caloric density. We're at 882 kcals per kg. Now this is significantly lower, almost half the amount of that farmer's dog diet. So you get to feed a lot more of this diet. So if you have a really small dog, this might be a really good option in order to feed more. Or if you have a dog that seems like a bottomless pit, another option in order to kind of provide that diet satisfaction with volume fed, which is kind of cool. As far as carbohydrates, pretty moderately low at 73 grams per 1,000 kcal. Now, I will say with our small breed dogs, as far as consistency of this diet, it is chunked. So if you do have a small breed dog that doesn't have that many teeth, which a lot of like Chihuahuas do and Doxies because they have extractions later in life, this diet might be a little bit hard to eat because it is in like little like chunks like this. Obviously it is smushy, but it might not be smushy enough for them to be able to easily consume. So that is something to consider. The one thing I like about the Just Food for Dogs diet, the venison is actually an adult only diet. So it's an adult maintenance diet, which is great. Now, as far as the company as a whole, the recipes were formulated by veterinarians with an education in diet formulation, and then it was reviewed by a board certified veterinary nutritionist. All the diets have undergone digestibility trials and AFCO feeding trials of their 5 main diets, which this venison diet is included under. They do have a test and hold procedure on the recipes for pathogens and toxins that come out of their main kitchen. So they have like a manufacturing facility, I believe it's in like LA, and a lot of their quality assurance program as far as test and hold is associated with that larger facility. They also have little tiny kitchens inside of like Petco's and in shopping centers. Those facilities, you can actually buy the freshly cooked diets before it's been frozen on the next day. And honestly, there's just not enough time for a test and hold there. So you would be taking on potentially that extra risk of they haven't taken the product, tested it, and then released it to the public there. So there is a little bit of a difference in that, but they do perform all the regular testing as far as equipment and swabs on their environment to be a human grade facility. All of their manufacturing facilities are owned by the company, so they are handling all of their quality control procedures and they are overseeing that entire process. They're not outsourcing it. Typical analysis on all their diets are available online. You just have to ask for them. Next diet, we are going to be talking about Nom Nom Turkey Recipe. So this is like a turkey and rice recipe that's fresh. As far as the guaranteed analysis to nutrient density, we're looking at protein that's pretty high, 93 grams per 1,000 kcals. Fat content's pretty moderately high at 49 grams per 1,000 kcals, and then carbohydrates pretty high at 97 grams per 1,000 kcals. Fiber content is a little bit lower here. It's only at 4%. Our caloric density is sitting at about 1,200. So you may not see as much diet satisfaction with this composition. Now, as far as the company as a whole, the recipes are formulated by a board certified veterinary nutritionist. Now, currently they were bought out by Mars Pet Care. So they do have like semi-access to the nutrition staff from Mars, which is like 50 different nutritional professionals that have like board certifications and PhDs and masters and stuff like that. But I'm not sure how much input they have, especially since obviously all these recipes were formulated before the purchase. But they may, if you see adjustments in the future, it may be because of that recent purchase. All the diets have undergone digestibility trials with excellent results, all in the 90s. They haven't done any long-term feeding trials, so no AFCO feeding trials on these diets. They do have a test and hold for their recipes to check for pathogens and toxins. toxins. They spot check their ingredients and final products for key nutritional factors. And they do have a typical analysis that is available online if you want to ask them on all of their diets. They own their own manufacturing facilities as well, which is super cool. All right, so the next diet we're gonna be looking at is the PetPlate pork diet. So again, transition the guaranteed analysis over to nutrient density. We're looking at about 87 grams per 1,000 kcals as far as protein, 49 grams per 1,000 kcals as far as fat, and then about 100 grams per 1,000 kcals as far as carbohydrates. Crude fiber is about 3% here. Caloric density is 1428. Now, when we're looking at this diet, again, we have that higher amount of protein, but we aren't seeing really that higher amount of fiber. So we may have issues with satiety because we don't have those two paired together. We can add in like extra sources of fiber, like those fruits and vegetables to the diet to maybe help boost that fiber content a little bit and make it so that it's more satisfying. Again, this isn't all life stage diet, which we don't love for those older adults or seniors. Now, as far as the company as a whole, their recipes are formulated by a board certified nutritionist. All the diets have undergone digestibility trials, but they haven't gone through any AFCO feeding trials at this time. They do have test and hold on their recipes to check for pathogens and toxins, and they do those spot checks that I'm talking about for key nutrients, and they do have a typical analysis available online on all of their diets. They're another one of those that use a USDA inspected human grade facility, so they don't own their own facility. Now, our last diet that we're going to be talking about today is going to be the Raised Right dog food. I'm going to be doing the adult beef recipe. So I converted again the guaranteed analysis over to the nutrient density, and we're looking at about 140 grams per 1,000 kcals as far as protein. That is really high. 55 grams per 1,000 kcals of fat, and then we are pretty low in carbohydrates at only 28 grams per 1,000 kcals. Fiber content is moderate at about 6%, and then caloric density is like that 1,400-ish range like we saw with the farmer's dog, and we also saw with the PetPlate diet. Now, as far as composition goes, we do have that higher amount of protein with the higher amount of fiber, so most likely we're going to see good satiety here. As far as caloric content, it's not as low in calories as that Just Food for Dogs diet, but because of the high amount of moisture within this diet, caloric density is still going to be pretty low, so likely going to have no issues maintaining a healthy weight as far as on this diet for caloric density. This diet is carbohydrate restrictive, so very low in carbs, and some dogs may not tolerate this higher amount of protein at like over 140 grams. Same with a lot of our other recipes like the farmer's dog and stuff, where we start to get over 50 grams per 1,000 kcals as far as fat content. Some dogs won't actually tolerate that. This diet is only slightly over. If you go with their turkey diets or their poultry diets, they're a little bit lower as far as fat content goes. I do like seeing this as an adult maintenance diet though, because that means that we can feed it to our older dogs potentially to help them when they get into their senior years, and this definitely has plenty of protein for our senior dogs. It almost might have too much. Now, as far as the company as a whole, recipes are formulated by an integrated veterinarian with an education and diet formulation. No digestibility or feeding trials have been done on these diets. They do have a really robust quality control program, so they test for pathogens and toxins, they do spot checks for key nutrients, they do typical analysis on final products. They've actually sent their diet to just third-party labs randomly to check to make sure it matches what was formulated, which I really appreciate. They use a human grade USDA inspected facility that makes other human products for their manufacturing, so they are outsourcing manufacturing here. They don't own their own facility, but they will have kind of a generalized higher standard by just using a human grade facility as far as quality control is concerned. Now, that was a lot of food. That was a huge long review. If you have any questions at all, make sure to leave them below. Next week, I'm actually going to be going into the formulation of a homemade diet that fits the nutritional profile for an inactive dog. I feel like in some ways when you're going to search out a food looking for a particular nutritional profile, it is sometimes harder to find them than if you're creating a homemade diet, because you have all the options in the world, and as long as you know what ingredients to choose, you can create that diet if you keep them in certain proportions, versus when you're going out into the space of pre-made pet food, you have to kind of pick and choose between different diets and do all this math and then compare them and go back to your dog and be like, okay, is it meeting my dog's nutritional needs? With a homemade diet, you have full customization to make it to your dog's nutritional needs instead. So I'll see you next week.